when we shed a lot of this physicality, and God begins to reveal himself increasingly more with every millennium, which he will do, till we get to a point what's called Tikkun Sod Achdus. In year 10,000, but time at that stage is not time as it is today, but whatever, at 10,000, today's 5785, right? So, in the 10,000 is another 5,000 years, 4,000 years from 6,000. At that point in time, we will unify with God in ways that we can't possibly comprehend. Kabbalah talks about this. And then we're going to know God, but we're not going to be like this anymore. So I have no idea what that means. You don't have to. He said to know that's where we're going. But the bottom point is the knowledge of God. You have to know God. That's what we're here to do. There's nothing else in life. You can have a job, you can be working, but God made all of this and all of history is for the sake of revealing his light. So he starts off at making a halal. The first thing he does is he creates a finite sphere of influence, of reality, where the light has been held back, so that when the light comes back in again in a measured amount, he can start making creation step by step. But you have all these different levels, starting off with a concept called Radla, Reish Delois Yada. Why? It's called the head. Why? Because the top three spheres correspond to Keser Chachma Bina or Chachma Bina Das. When you look at it, right? So that's supposed to corresponds to the physical head, because the human body is a replication of the spheres. Our bodies are created the way they are because that's the way Hashem made the entire universe, the entire world, the spirit. So all the levels. So it's called the head because it corresponds to the top of the system. It's called the Lois Yadad. It's not known because that level of light, as Moshe asked and as refused, right? You can't know it. It's too sublime. It's too spiritual. It's beyond comprehension. There's nothing. It's a light that by definition cannot be contained by any container. Spiritual, physical for sure not, but spiritual for sure not either. It can't. It's just too. There's no container that can handle it. So therefore, it's this light that's being maintained in a particular area within creation by the will of God only. That's all. Because there's nothing to make. There's no boundaries for it, and because there's no kli, we can't know it. There's no vessel. You can't know it. The same way, for example, without your body, no one would know your soul. It's only through your body that we know about your soul, because your body is instinctual. Take the soul out of the body, it has no life of its own. All the life that the body gives off, that you're able to see through the body, is just the soul acting out through the body. So we get to know. It's, why am I laughing? Because I was talking to someone this morning about this very idea and how even just the way people drive on the highway, you can get to know them. You see a guy who's weaving in and out of traffic and he's putting others at risk. He's putting himself at risk. You don't even know who the person is, but by the way he deals with his vessel, right? The vessel itself, his car, is a statement of his attitude by the way he's driving. When someone you see responsibly flicks, signals to go and to change one lane to the next lane, and they check their mirrors and they make sure it's all safe and they're not running back and forth and trying to get ahead, and then you get the impression the person's a responsible person. So the car itself becomes the vehicle to express the driver inside. I can't say you can sum the person up completely that way, because maybe the person's in an emergency, you don't know, right? I always like to, judge the merit, side of merit and assume there's some emergency the person's dealing with. Never really works, but it's just to diffuse the situation. The body is the exact same way. How you act with yourself and with others is a way of revealing the soul to the outside world. But when the soul leaves the body, as it does at death, you can't see the soul anymore. You can't tell what the soul's like. It's the body that gives form, so to speak, to the soul. Without the body, the soul doesn't go anywhere, so to speak, just floats around, goes to Shemayim till he meets the next body after that. So the same thing is true of all of creation. Creation is like the body for the light of God on different levels. So we know that God is merciful, that God can be judgmental, he can be punishing, he can be jealous. All these different attributes that we're being told is just the way the light shows up, because the same way, for example, there are times that we lose our temper, we get angry, and the anger comes out through our body and the way we express ourselves. There's times we're merciful, we're kind, we're relaxed. These are all different attributes to do with the person's soul. If a person's soul is rooted in gevura, in judgment, then they will tend to be critical and judgmental. If a person's soul is rooted in chesed, kindness, then they seem very chilled up, very relaxed. They will act that way in life. Of course, the body colors the drive of the soul because the body, once it's alive, does have instinct. So it makes kind of like a combination. So really, personality that we see from people is going to be an expression of the percentage of the mixture of body and soul. As the more soul involved, the more spiritual the person is going to act. The more the body's involved. So when a person goes to shul, to synagogue, does a mitzvah, which talks to the soul, that person will act more spiritual. If a person goes to a shopping mall where it talks to the body completely, that person's not going to be so spiritual to the shopping mall because the body will be stronger. But that's your personality. What you see in the shopping mall, it can be very different because the combination varies. The same thing is true of creation. Creation is the body of the light of God. And the point of Kabbalah is to be able to access those different parts of the body of creation to be able to understand the various different components of God's personality, so to speak. Because that's what he wants. That's why he's making everything. So Kabbalah basically is essential because without it, a person doesn't really know what to do with life. Live by Torah mitzvahs. Today I was davening next to somebody, and I wasn't watching him, but he was standing close enough to me. I could see it at the corner of my eye, and I could see him step into Shemona Esrei and finish his Shemona Esrei literally when I was in the fifth bracha. And, I wasn't going that slow. And I don't even know how it's physically. The guy looks like he's someone who I wouldn't think for 1 second that he didn't say all the brachas. I am sure he said all the brachas. The question I have is, how could he say them so quickly? Even if you want to daven quickly, how do you speak that quickly? How do you get the words out of your mouth that quickly? And the first thing he did when he finished was learn Gemara. He finished as quickly as possible to learn Gemara. He's learning God's Torah. Gemara is what God gave to us to understand how to function in this world. He's learning the Gemara. But the time he actually had to speak to his Creator, who gives him life, who gives him health, who gives him the opportunity to learn Gemara, who gives him everything, he mevatel that, basically. If he had, maybe I could assume, I could dan lechav schuz and say, he davened everything properly. He had amazing kavanah in the 5 brachos. But if you look in the Gemara and it tells you how you're supposed to daven, it doesn't mention that. In an emergency situation, you have to go someplace else very quickly. Understandable. Halacha takes into account, those type of situations. We have bidei evids. We have the halacha like that. But if the goal is just to finish as quickly as possible and go back to Gemara, whose Gemara are you learning? Whose Torah are you learning? Talking to Kosh Baruch Hu. This is the master. He doesn't understand. I wanted to ask him, but people take offense to questions like that. He doesn't understand because if he fully understood what he was doing and he believed in what he was doing, he would approach completely differently. It's like the same thing. If a person, their life is going well, they feel that they have nothing to complain about, nothing really major. They don't go to the kotel very often. They don't daven that hard necessarily. But if all of a sudden, chas v'chalil, a person's a crisis, and they feel desperate, the doctors can't help, the bank can't help, their parents can't help, and they feel desperate. The only way they can turn to Kosh Baruch Hu, and they go to the kotel once, twice, 3 times. They daven, they're crying, saying Tehillim, they spend extra time, because all of a sudden it becomes real. That connection that allows a person to be able to recognize God in their life, to feel his presence in their life, it doesn't come from Gemara. It doesn't come from Mishnah. It could, but not usually. The Gra says that anybody who learns Torah without learning Kabbalah is like a body without a soul. He says, because as we saw last week, everything short of Kabbalah belongs to the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. He calls it the body of Torah. It's the goof, but it's like a dead goof. because you can learn it and still be arrogant. You can learn it and still not connect to Kodesh Baruch Hu. You can become a huge Talmid Chacham, know all the halachas, be even a posik, and still not connect to Kodesh Baruch Hu. But that's the whole point of life. That's the whole point of creation. That's the whole point of tikkun. So that's just one aspect of it. But let's say, for example, there are other concepts that are hugely important to know just in terms of historical context, because historical context is really what life comes down to in the end. We're in a situation right now. Go back to the 1930s. 1930s, the Chafetz Chaim is pounding his table every single day and saying that millions are going to die and no one's doing anything about it, and no one knew what he was talking about. And Hitler, Yamach Shemo V'Zichro, is rising to power, and 6 million Jews out of 11 million Jews in Europe at that time get eradicated, get killed, and with in the worst way possible, they die. And the question is, was there a way out? Could we have avoided the situation? Those are big questions, and they're all part of Kabbalah too. But that's not the issue. The issue here is not the first time, and it wasn't the last time. See, here we are again today. Anti-Semitism is up 800%. The world is anti-Israel, which is the same as anti-Semitism. And what people tell you, it's the same thing. You tell them you're Jewish, and they identify immediately with Israel, and they have the same criticism for you as a Jew as they do, which is why so many Jews over the last decade have turned against their own people to fit in with the rest of the world. And the dynamics of history are going a certain direction, and people want to know, is this just a passing phase? And therefore, all I have to do is hunker down and bear with it, do the best I can to survive it? Or is this something to do with the end of days? If you look at the Gemara, there's no answer. You look at the Sfarim, right? The Nikla, the revealed Sfarim, there's no answer. You look at the Chumash, there might be hints, but no answers. So people just go about their lives as if everything, is what as bad as it is not that bad after all. Where are the answers to such questions? They're in Kabbalah. The Zohar speaks about it. So you hear about things like resurrection of the dead taking place 210 and 214 years before 6,000. It doesn't say before 6,000. It just says that Techis and Macy, the resurrection of the dead, will last 210 years according to Rabbi Yehuda and 214 years according to Rabbi Yitzchak. And that's after 40 years from Kibbutz Galios. So that's 250 to 254 years of time that could happen anywhere in history, because the Zohar is written back at the time of the Second Temple. He made that prediction back then. And it could happen anytime, except that history ran out. As of 1990, we hit the 250-year mark. We're now within that. That now it's like 30 years later, basically. Over 30 years later since that time, 20 years later since that time, 24 years, 25 to be 19. What year is this? It's 2025. Yeah, so 25 years later, 35 years later. Pardon me, 35 years later, right? Into that period of time, and the significance of that is not just the fact that we no longer have 250 years left, which means we have to already be in the 40-year period of time that the Zohar speaks about, which means the Chis and Mason has to be coming up, and the end of history has to be very close. That's the Zohar. And on top of that, as the Leshem points out, and the Vilna Gaon points out in the Sefer Tznusa, the Sefer that one of the most Kabbalistic Sforim, that the 6 millennia correspond to the 6 days of creation, which correspond to the 6 spheres. Now, if you look at the back of Derech Hashem in English, Rav Aryeh Kaplan brings down that the Rambam and others didn't necessarily hold of the 6,000 years. The Gemara says 6,000 years, but they hold that the Gemara doesn't have to be taken literally.